Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up the hood of the human mind to look at a specific engine part that I frankly didn't even know existed.
It's a fascinating one.
Yeah, we always talk about learning a second language.
Yeah.
It's the classic self-improvement goal, right? You speak English, you learn Spanish. It's a simple linear progression.
Or so we think.
Right. But I've been reading through this stack of research you sent over, and it turns out the moment you decide to learn a third language, the mechanics of your brain just completely change.
It stops being a linear process and starts becoming a negotiation, and a pretty heated one at that.
Because when you're learning your second language, your brain only has one reference point, your native tongue.
Mm-hmm. It's a one-on-one comparison.
But with a third language, L3, suddenly you have two installed operating systems. You have your native L1, and you have this foreign L2 you've acquired. And the big question is, when you start language number 3, which one does your brain use as a blueprint?
That is the million-dollar question in linguistics right now. And, we're looking at a massive systematic review here. Dynamics of linguistic transfer in third language acquisition.
And massive is not an exaggeration.
Not at all.
Yeah.
It covers 92 different studies, over 2,200 participants, and 25 different languages. And we're not just talking about English and German, we're talking about Basque, Tuvan, Mazandarani. It's an incredible data set.
So the mission was to find the source of the transfer.
Right.
Does the brain default to your native language?
Mm-hmm.
Or the most recent one? Or is it doing something way more complicated? And I have to say, they don't bury the lead in this paper.
No, they don't. They tell you right away that the answer is messy. They state unequivocally that linguistic transfer, copying rules from an old language to a new one, it definitely happens. It shapes how we learn.
Right.
But they also admit that no single theoretical model currently explains 100% of the data.
Which feels very honest for an academic paper. They're basically refereeing a cage match between all the existing theories. So before we look at the results, maybe we should quickly introduce the contenders.
Yeah, that's a good idea. There are basically 4 main models on the table. The first 2 are what we call default models.
Okay, so these are the rigid ones. First up is the L1 default.
Right. The idea that your native language is king. It's the bedrock of your cognition, so your brain will just force those rules onto any new language you try to learn.
Simple enough. What's its rival?
The L2 status factor.
This is the one I found psychologically fascinating. It argues the brain has 2 buckets, native and foreign.
Exactly. And once you learn a second language, your brain creates this foreign language mode. So when you start a third language, your brain just goes, oh, I know where this goes, in the weird foreign bucket. And it defaults to using the L2 as a bridge.
So let me get this straight. If I'm a native English speaker who learned Japanese, and now I want to learn German, the L2 status theory says my brain would try to use Japanese grammar to speak German, even though English and German are practically cousins.
Theoretically, yes. That is what the model predicts. The status of the language as foreign matters more than the linguistic content.
That seems wildly inefficient. But okay, we'll get to the data. Then we have the third contender, which I'm calling the Marie Kondo of theories.
The cumulative enhancement model, or CEM, yeah. The optimists.
Right. This model suggests the brain is smart and selective. It scans your L1 and your L2.
Yeah.
And it just asks, does this grammar help me? If it helps, it transfers it. If it doesn't.
It leaves it behind. It assumes all prior learning is an asset, and the brain acts as a filter.
And finally, number 4, the heavy favorite in modern linguistics.
Yeah.
The typological primacy model, or TPM.
This is the similarity theory. The TPM argues the brain doesn't care about labels like native or foreign. It cares about patterns. It scans the input of the new language and just asks, what does this look like?
It's a matching game.
Precisely. If your L2 looks like the L3, the brain grabs the L2 grammar. If the L1 looks like the L3, it grabs the L1 grammar. It's all about structural similarity.
So we've got the native default, the foreign bucket, the optimist, and the lookalike. And these researchers coded 92 studies to see who wins. And the biggest headline here is the absolute collapse of the default theories.
It really was a massacre for the rigid models. I mean, out of 92 studies, only 15 showed exclusive transfer from the L1.
And only 29 showed exclusive transfer from the L2.
Right. And even those numbers are inflated. When you actually control for other variables, like whether the languages were similar to begin with, the evidence for a strict always L1 or always L2 rule just, it drops to less than 5% of the data.
Less than 5%. That is statistically negligible.
It is.
So we can officially bust the myth that you always build on your native language or you always build on your most recent language.
The brain is not a robot following a single switch. No, it's much more adaptive. The clear winner in the data was typology, the similarity model.
By how much?
It had the highest coverage, compatible with 64.1% of the studies. That's 59 out of 92.
That's a convincing majority. It tells us the brain is fundamentally a detective.
Yeah.
If I know Spanish and I start Italian, my brain doesn't care that English is my native tongue. It sees the Italian, sees the Spanish, and realizes, hey, these are basically siblings.
And it starts copying the Spanish homework. That is exactly what happens. But this leads us to a darker side of the data. We have to talk about that optimist model again.
The cumulative enhancement model, the one that says we only transfer the good stuff.
The data was absolutely brutal to this theory. The researchers coded for something called non-facilitative transfer.
Which is a polite way of saying learning the wrong thing.
Correct. It means transferring a grammatical rule that is incorrect for the new language and actually makes learning harder. If the optimist model were true, this shouldn't happen very often.
But it does.
Out of 92 studies, 82 of them showed non-facilitative transfer.
Wait, 82 out of 92? That's nearly 90%.
89.1% to be exact.
That blows my mind. It means 90% of the time when we start a new language, our brain hands us a tool that doesn't work. We are sabotaging ourselves.
I wouldn't call it sabotage, I'd call it aggressive economy. This finding it completely falsifies the strong version of the cumulative enhancement model. It proves the brain isn't prioritizing accuracy or helpfulness.
It's prioritizing efficiency. It's lazy.
It's efficient. It's looking for a shortcut. It says, this new language looks like Spanish. I have a Spanish blueprint right here. I'm going to use it. It doesn't check every single room in the house to see if the blueprint matches perfectly. It just starts building.
So we prioritize speed over getting it right. We'd rather be quick and wrong than slow and correct.
In the initial stages, absolutely. And this explains why learning a third language can feel so frustrating. You aren't just making random mistakes. You are systematically applying a rule your brain insists is relevant, even when it isn't.
That actually makes me feel better. It's not that I'm dumb. It's that my brain is trying to be too efficient for its own good. But there's another layer here. The researchers spent a lot of time critiquing how these studies were designed.
Yes. Methodology is everything in this field. If you design the experiment poorly, you can trick yourself into seeing a pattern that isn't really there.
And they found this was a big problem for the L2 status theory, which brings us to mirror image groups.
The gold standard. It's a simple logic check. Let's say you want to prove that everyone defaults to their L2. You take a group of native Spanish speakers who learned English, and now they are learning Portuguese.
Okay, L1 Spanish, L2 English, L3 Portuguese.
If they use English grammar for Portuguese, a researcher might say, aha, they use the L2. The theory is correct.
But wait, just one group doesn't prove the rule. Maybe there's some other reason they used English.
Exactly. To really prove it's about L2 status, you need the mirror image. You need a second group. Native English speaker who learned Spanish, also learning Portuguese.
You flip the background. L1 English, L2 Spanish. Now, if the theory holds, this group should use their L2.
Spanish, they should use Spanish. And the first group should use English.
But if both groups use Spanish,
then it's not about L2 status. It's about Spanish being structurally similar to Portuguese. It's typology.
So how many of the 92 studies actually did this?
Most didn't. Only 30. And here's the kicker. The studies that did use mirror image groups overwhelmingly supported typological transfer similarity, not L2 status.
So the L2 is king theory was mostly propped up by incomplete science.
You could say that, yeah. When you don't use a mirror group, you often attribute results to L2 status when it's actually just similarity doing the work.
That is a massive red flag. They also mention a problem with production versus comprehension tasks.
Right, a classic issue. Production is speaking or writing, comprehension is listening or reading, and the results differed quite a bit.
How so?
Studies that relied on production tasks speaking were much more likely to show what they call hybrid transfer, which is a chaotic mix of rules from both previous languages.
Which makes intuitive sense. If I'm trying to speak, I'm stressed. I'm thinking about pronunciation, vocabulary. My brain is scrambling.
Exactly. Speaking adds cognitive noise. That stress might make your grammar look mixed or random, but that chaos is in the performance, not necessarily in the underlying competence. Comprehension tasks are cleaner.
So my fumbling in French class looks like a mess, but a multiple choice quiz might show that my brain actually does have a system it's trying to use.
That's the argument. The competence is cleaner than the performance.
Okay, I want to zoom in on one specific case study that the text highlighted because it really drives this all home. The ab initio trap.
Yes, this was a study by Puigmayenko and Rothman. It's a perfect example. They had 60 learners of L3 English, and they used a proper mirror image design. Group 1 was L1 Catalan, L2 Spanish. The other was L1 Spanish, L2 Catalan.
Perfect flip. And they were testing negative quantifiers, words like nobody or nothing.
Right. So in English, Mary will call us if Peter says anything is existential, but Mary will call us if Peter says nothing is negative. Two different words, two meanings.
Okay.
But in Catalan and Spanish, the words for these can overlap in complex ways. So the researchers gave learners sentences like, Laura will call us if John eats nothing.
Which means John has to be starving for Laura to call.
Oh.
In English, yes. But depending on your L1, you might interpret that differently.
Right.
And initially, the data looked hybrid. It seemed both groups were using this weird mix of Catalan and Spanish rules. It was a mess.
But they didn't stop there.
No, they did some detective work. They looked at the background questionnaires. These people were in a beginner English course. But it turned out 30% of them weren't true beginners. They'd had prior exposure 12 to 48 months of English classes in the past.
So they were rusty learners, not new ones.
Precisely. And in this kind of research, beginner proficiency does not mean initial state. Even a little bit of learning changes the brain.
So what happened when they took them out of the data?
The results completely changed. When they looked only at the true ab initio learners' zero prior exposure, the hybrid mess disappeared, vanished. The transfer became purely Catalan-based for both groups.
Pure Catalan. Why Catalan?
Likely due to the specific structural way Catalan handles those words, or maybe the dominance of Catalan in that region. But the why isn't even the most important part. The point is that the hybrid result was an illusion.
Caused by the rusty learners. That's wild. It means those learners with a bit of experience had already started rewriting their mental maps, and it was obscuring the original transfer.
Exactly. It highlights the ab initio trap. If you confuse a low proficiency learner with a true beginner, your conclusions might be completely wrong.
It makes you wonder how many of those other 91 studies were contaminated.
It's a valid concern, and it's why this review is so important.
Okay, so let's boil this all down. We've covered the theories, the data, the negative transfer, the bad methodology. For someone listening, maybe thinking about learning that third language, what are the big takeaways?
I think there are four main pillars. Number one, forget the default switches. There's no automatic rule that says you'll use your native language or your second language.
It's more dynamic. Number two.
Similarity is the boss. Typology. Your brain is a pattern matching machine, and it will look for the language that resembles the new one.
Number three, the one that hurts a little. The brain prioritizes economy over accuracy.
Yes, that 89% number. Your brain will give you the wrong tool if it's the easiest one to reach. You are fighting against your own cognitive efficiency.
And finally, number four, science is in the details. How you ask the question changes the answer.
Absolutely. We're still refining the tools we use to map the multilingual mind.
It's fascinating. Right now, in language classrooms everywhere, there are these invisible arguments happening inside people's heads.
And usually they pick the map that looks the most familiar, even if it leads them straight off a cliff.
Which is a perfect segue to our final thought. We've spent a lot of time sort of bashing the brain for being lazy and giving us the wrong grammar. But is it really a flaw?
That's the question I want to leave you with. We look at that 89% negative transfer rate, and we call it a failure. We say the brain is making an error, but what if the biological goal is energy conservation?
How do you mean?
Building a new system from scratch takes a massive amount of metabolic energy. Using an old system, even a flawed one, allows you to start processing input immediately. Maybe the error isn't a bug. Maybe the error is the feature.
So being wrong quickly is better than being right slowly.
Biologically speaking, it just might be. It gets you communicating, however imperfectly, much faster than silence would.
That is certainly something to tell myself the next time I completely butcher a sentence. I'm not failing. I'm just being biologically efficient.
But that's the spirit.
Thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the multilingual mind. We'll see you next time.